Once again, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us during the webinar dedicated to nuclear energy in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. This event is organized by n-ost, media NGO that operates in Germany with an in-depth project. We work with climate journalism, and in this framework, we have prepared a series of webinars that are organized in collaboration with our partners from CAN EECCA. So thank you all for those who have joined us. We're focusing today on Eastern Europe and Central Asia, because we see that in the countries that we have mentioned before, the nuclear energy is discussed more and more. We see that the nuclear power plant is launched in Belarus, the first unit, the second unit, all of that is happening at the background of constant challenges that the construction of this nuclear power plant is faced with. There is a war happening in our region, and we also hear a lot about what is happening in Zaporozhye and in Chernobyl nuclear power plant. We also see the trend about Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, where nuclear power plants are also being constructed. Also, CAN have published a position paper on nuclear energy. Also today we have the representative from CAN EECCA, Olha Boyko, and she will also say a couple of words about the position paper that they have published. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. So we have speakers from Eastern Europe and from Central Asia, respectively. And from what I can see, even Svetlana Mogilyuk also joined us, which makes us extremely happy. Now, speaking about our speakers, first, we will start with Eastern Europe. We'll give the floor to Artem, Kolesnyk, energy policy specialist from EcoAction. He's from Ukraine. And Tatiana Gendel, she is a journalist from the Green Portal, Belarus. So Tanya will tell about how to write, how to cover this topic. Then we will travel to Central Asia. We have Svetlana Mogilyuk, who is the chairperson of the Ecoforum of Kazakhstan. This is an association from Kazakhstan. Also, Maxim Kravchenko, her colleague, is here, who represents anti-nuclear campaign, who also represents Kazakhstan Ecoforum, and Aliya Vidaliv. She is the representative of the Central Asian information resource that is called Ecostan News, and also is the partner of Ecoforum. We have lots of journalists present here today. Well, not lots of, but we do have journalists here with us today, and I hope that this will be a good opportunity to ask questions. So we'll be happy if you post questions to our experts, and if this topic later on becomes more visible in your media outlets and in your countries. So let us first give the floor to Artem. Artem, over to you. Yes. Hello. Can you hear me well? Yes. Amazing. Okay. Then first, I'd like to share my screen. Okay. Can you see everything? Yes, we can see you. We can hear you. Well, in general, I'll try to fit a lot of information in 15-minute time slot. Everybody heard about Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. That's why I'm not gonna focus on it that much. I'd rather look at a broader picture and talk about the tendencies of the Ukrainian power industry and about the consequences of the Kakhovka power plant that exploded. Well, remember what happened on February 24, when nuclear power plants were occupied by the Russian armed forces. In general, I think the most important thing here is that it was an unprecedented event. If we look at all the wars that happened before, this happened for the first time. In the course of a year, when the Zaporozhye power plant was occupied, lots of things have happened. Almost every month, everybody could see what was happening there. There were different news coming from the power plant. Actually, I talked to one of the employees, one of the engineers, one of the chief engineers at the nuclear power plant. Presently, he is in Germany. I'd like to tell the journalists, if somebody is interested in talking to him, you can get in touch with me. He is happy to respond to questions, to talk to the journalists. And until August 2022, he stayed in the nuclear power plants, and he can provide you with detailed information on what was happening there during the period when he stayed there. And he also kept in touch with some of other nuclear power plant employees, so he can tell you in details about the crimes that Russian soldiers committed there, and what role the Rosatom played, and what role it still plays. Well, basically speaking about the consequences, I'm not going to go into detail here. The most important thing to understand is that having lost Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, our energy sector has lost up to 40% of nuclear power generation in Ukraine, because this is the biggest power plant in Ukraine and in Europe. And we all understand that this is not yet the end of the story. So now we only see how the events are evolving, and I believe that there is still a lot that's gonna happen. However, the recent events, I already mentioned Kakhovka Dam, and you know, we were speculating whether it would happen or not. Everybody had different thoughts about it. Everybody was thinking whether it was going to happen or not. Some people expected it, others not. It was the same basically as with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but whatever happened did happen. The main consequences for the nuclear power plant is the following. What is the situation at the power plant? I believe that everybody knows these news, heard about it, but I think that the most important thing is that the majority of units, 5 out of 6, are now in the cold stop. This is the technical process that usually nuclear power plants are using when you have to change the fuel. Now, for the most of the time, only the 5th unit was using the hot stop, and they are now trying to come up with the excuse when they are talking to the IAEA, and they are saying that they require chemical water that does not contain salt to support all of the units in cold condition and to produce steam. In fact, this is just an excuse, because you can get steam from other sources too. And there are also steam generators that they brought there, but they are not using them. And I don't want to speculate what is happening, but from what we see, from what is happening at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plants, from our intelligence, from Mr. Budanov, the head of our intelligence, we heard that the 4th energy unit is mined. Next, the 5th unit was moved to the cold shutdown, and the 4th was launched again. And the situation now, after what happened at Kakhovka Dam, is also making things worse, because to work during the hot shutdown, you require a lot of water. If you have heard statements coming from the Ukrainian side, basically I'm now talking about head of the Energoatom of Ukraine, they said that there is water sufficient for more than 6 months, but that's not exactly true. According to the engineer that I talked to, there is sufficient amount of water for 2 to 3 months tops. Later on, you can supply more water in the reservoir that is located next to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, but there are also some challenges to that, because the river Dnipro changed, so you have to build the system from scratch again. So if we're looking at the situation, say, when the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant goes back under the control of the Ukrainian side, most likely it won't be the part of the energy system the same as it used to be, because when the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed, it became obvious you cannot supply necessary amount of water for work of all 6 units of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Now, I would like to talk about the short-term consequences. Aside from the humanitarian and environmental disaster, among the long-term consequences as the result of the Kakhovka Dam damage, we also see that the level of water in the cooling pond dropped. Atom, our side, is trying to monitor what is happening. Now, when it is hot, we see that water is evaporating faster, but it is considered that in the critical condition, the water can be pumped from the underground wells that are located in the vicinity of those reservoirs. Also, another source is the Zaporozhye thermal power plant canal, and this water can also be used for the reservoirs of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in addition. But there is yet another version. Even if we demine the nuclear power plant, we need an efficient solution with supplying water to the cooling pond of the nuclear power plant. Otherwise, we won't be able to operate it again. Well, most likely everybody heard on the news that at the end of July, there were first shots that showed how Kakhovka Dam looks. It basically is a desert. And it does look like desert, like Sahara Desert. We can see that the soil is cracked there, and this testifies the environmental disaster. Now we hear different opinions regarding whether we should restore the dam to provide people with water, people who live in the vicinity of Kakhovka Dam, as well as industrial places and facilities. But these are real plans of Hydro Ukrenergo, and they are planning to also now do something with the dam that was destroyed, and build the new power plant and use it to regulate the peak loads. Our position, EcoAction's position, as well as position of many other environmental organizations in Ukraine, is that we believe that the dam should not be restored because, well, it already was a disaster when it was constructed during the Soviet Union days, and we can restore of the natural potential in the region even without building the dam again. But this is very complicated process. This position is not really taken into account. Our government is not really taken into account when they are voicing their intentions. And probably this is a pretty widespread opinion in Ukraine now, that we have to restore the power plant. And as Irina has already mentioned today, this has to do with the more and more popularity that the nuclear power industry is gaining. And we also see it because one of the important components for work was of the nuclear power plant was Kakhovka Dam. But yes, it looks like we do need this hydroelectric power plant for the work of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Okay, let us move on. Here on this slide, I wanted to show you some information from the UNDP report. And here you can see everything that Ukraine had lost since the full-scale invasion started. how our generating capacity is dropped. Well, I'm not gonna read every line, every bullet point that you can see on the screen. You can take a closer look at them on your own, or you can even look at the UNDP report. It shows in pretty good detail the situation in Ukraine and demonstrates what is happening at the moment in the energy domain in Ukraine. Well, in general, the overall damage to the energy, gas, thermal coal infrastructure in Ukraine totals 10 billion USD, given serious damage currently and in the coming years. The deficit of power supply, the main effort should be aimed at improving the supply systems and also introducing additional generating capacities. In mid and long run, it shows that that decentralization of the energy system is what matters, as well as Ukraine's as what Ukraine has said, that it will be moving towards more environmentally friendly sources of energy. But we all sadly understand that nuclear power is also part of a more environmentally friendly solution. That is why the nuclear power is now developing in Ukraine. And here are some of the plans that were introduced. Because you know that Ukraine Recovery Conference recently happened in London. There were lots of representatives from different countries, and they were talking about restoring Ukraine. The Ministry of Energy of Ukraine introduced plans dedicated to improving energy supply for industry, and to be honest, the numbers are impressive. For those who are fighting climate change and those who are supporting wind and solar power generation, it may seem that Ukraine's plans are pretty environmentally neutral and anti-nuclear, though in fact, given what is happening in the domestic market and what we know and hear, a lot of attention is paid to the nuclear power. I don't know if all of you heard that Ukraine purchased Bulgarian equipment. For those who haven't heard of it, Ukraine decided to purchase old equipment that was produced by Rosatom, by Russia in Bulgaria. But the project there failed. But the equipment still stayed. Bulgaria did not use it, and they suggested that Ukraine buys this equipment. And the biggest challenge, the biggest issue with it is that the situation is as follows. We do not rely on Russia in terms of fuel supply. We are now using Westinghouse fuel, but the situation took more than 12 years. So that using every type of course, because we have different types, year 1440, we needed some time to pick the specific type. That is why now the situation with purchasing Bulgarian equipment looks pretty sad, because mostly this is Russian equipment. And again, yet again, we are becoming dependent on Russia. And there was a lot of criticism in terms of the decision made by our government. But this is coming from the presidential office, and they say that these plans are implementable. But everything, in fact, is far worse, because we at the state, Ukraine, are also talking about technologies that does not exist yet. The small module course, I haven't followed the situation in Central Asia. I don't know, but probably they also talk about it. Because in Ukraine, it is discussed a lot. And in future energy mix plans, it is already mentioned that by 2035, the small modular reactors will be working and used. Because we all know how the nuclear energy works. For example, some of the projects that also have been implemented when the budget was not calculated properly, and they required twice the amount that was calculated initially. So you cannot exactly think about relying on the technology that is not even yet available, but this is the trend that we are observing at the moment in Ukraine. And nuclear power pre-war was about 55% of all of the energy generation, depended on the period, but in general it was up to 55%. And in fact, by 2050, the overall energy mix, according to the plans that they already are thinking about, there will be about 60% of the nuclear power. So they say that nuclear power is environmentally friendly, and it is planned to use it pretty widely in Ukraine, as well as extraction. Of course, they dream of, and Artem has mentioned on numerous occasions that we are planning to create the closed chain in Ukraine, starting with the fossil fuels. And recently, we also constructed a reservoir that was constructed in Chernobyl zone. So to sum it up, I'd like to say that I work with nuclear energy, and I work in an organization where one of the few who are against nuclear power. It always is complicated. It always is hard to seek support even among people like you, and trends do not look that positive for now. The only thing that makes us happy, though, is that they are being pretty unrealistic when they are talking about nuclear power, because when the Deputy Minister of Energy says that we are gonna construct 1 unit of a nuclear power plant over 6 years, sounds ridiculous. And anybody who understands this subject a little bit, that it requires 10 to 15 years worldwide. So you cannot state that Ukraine will be able to do that within 6 years, because this is ridiculous. And they are not doing proper budget estimates. I think they have mentioned something about around 8 billion USD per one energy unit. Let's take Westinghouse again. How? If they required at least 15 billion. So more questions pop up here. So we do see the trend of supporting nuclear energy and developing the sector, but plans are pretty unrealistic, and we keep pointing at that. For example, I will soon do a research, and I want to show that the foundation, the fund that is supposed to work with decommissioning, is not doing their job properly. They are not even looking at decommissioning the old power units, because we, as a humanity, have not yet started to stop producing lots of nuclear energy. And yes, it will cost billions of USD to stop the operation of 1 unit. And we, as a state, not capable of closing even a single unit of nuclear power plant. And there are already plans of building new ones, decommissioning old ones, and something does not add up here. So these are the trends that we are currently observing. Yes, I think that I have already been speaking for more than 15 minutes. I'm ready to take your questions now.
то вы можете написать их в чате, и мы зададим уже после всех спикеров. Спасибо большое, Артем. Сейчас перейдем к Беларуси, и я передаю.
Thank you very much, Artem, and I would like to give the floor to Tanya. Yes, thank you very much. Good day, everyone, and thank you very much for such an interesting speech. And I will try to share the position of the journalist. As for a journalist, I have to say that Artem's slides and presentation was the most interesting one, and there are at least a few topics that I would like to uncover even more from the point of journalism. So I will contact you. And this actually was a great example of how you can find interesting topics to investigate even more. You come to such events as a journalist and you pick up more subjects and topics for your work. So this is my presentation. Can you see it well? All right. So I'll try to be very brief. We are limited in time. So I'd like to share how journalists work on the subject of nuclear energy in Belarus. And I decided to approach my presentation with understanding that we have here experienced journalists, most probably among our participants, but maybe some of you haven't worked with nuclear energy as a topic yet. So quite often we are not experts in specific subject. We don't have a degree in this field, so we have to know how to write about such a complex subject that is surrounded by myth and a lot of arguments and ideas. So how to write and how to cover such news and topics when you are not an expert in it. So I would like to start by saying that the field of energy is very interesting and you have to be highly responsible. This is a very responsible process as it is, because the subject is very important. So here, I have to say that we in our publishing house, we don't support nuclear energy as a whole, and we publish a lot about the nuclear energy as something that is dangerous, something that is not very good in general. And we speak more generally also in terms of the energy transition period. So our position is kind of negative if we speak about it. So how do I work? How do I approach such topics? First of all, I have to say that we're not a newsfeed portal, but we write articles rather than short news, and these articles are written by authors, by journalists, and different news could serve as a foundation for a full article. For example, when I was on my vacation, I discovered that there was news that Lukashenko mentioned that Belarus requires the second nuclear power plant. So I could take this news in order to write down an article and analyze why it is not such a good idea, analyze the consequences, etc. Well, of course, in such articles, there should be an overview of benefits of such energy, because we can't close eyes, we can't ignore it. But in general, my articles are dedicated to consequences and informing people how this type of energy is working and how this field is working. So this is an example of how to plan an article, my approach. First of all, I'm thinking about the title of an article, or maybe the idea for an article that would be interesting to me personally. I think this is the best approach, where you found your work on your own interest. Or, as I already mentioned, you might pick up a trending news, as I just mentioned, about the second power plant construction in Belarus, and then you could uncover it. You could also share it with your friends, with your colleagues, and develop an article which would be interesting to everyone to read. So how do you work next? Then you collect data, you read analytical articles, maybe you can read some other sources, specifically in English language, and you could talk about different ideas with your colleagues or friends. Just as I mentioned in the very beginning, I don't have a specific degree in this field, so I'm not an expert. And for me, in order to write an article, I always look for experts, for people who really know well the subject, who would help me to understand so that I could help other people to get unconfused, so to say, regarding the topic. So I'm collecting the information and then I'm sending to an expert and I'm asking them to comment on that, to share their ideas, and it works quite well. So experts is the best source for us. And over some years of my work, I have a specific number of people whom I'm talking to, whom I'm contacting, but over time, this number of people increases even more. So where to look for different types of data? We have international organizations, their names you can see on the slide, but also we have our national organizations. Like in Belarus, we have Ecodia, Association for Renewable Energy. In Ukraine, they have their own associations and organizations. So you can have a combination of national and international associations in order to find such data that normally they publish on their website. They are publicly available, and then you can discuss this data with the experts, asking them for their opinion, for interpretation of this data. And here I'd like to talk more about how to talk to experts, how to take interviews from those experts. Different people have different opinions, different points of view, and normally I try to talk to scientists, but also to other experts, for example, people who work in non-profit organizations, who work in this field, maybe not as scientists, but they, for example, might explain to you in more simple terms rather than scientific terms, which is a problem when you talk to a scientist. And it's sometimes very difficult to interpret this complicated language into readable language. So this is one of examples of my articles, and I hope that Ira will share the links to some of my articles, which you can read. And I'd like to share more how I worked on those articles. For example, in Belarus, in the beginning of October, there was a discussion initiated with the public circles about the radioactive or nuclear wastes. So it was a very good possibility for me to uncover or to take the news about the nuclear waste that had to be sent to Russia, but it never left Belarus. At least there was such an idea. So I contacted a few experts who told me that actually there was no any document signed that the nuclear waste would be sent to Russia after the nuclear energy produced. So, but the people, the civil society, everyone thought that this nuclear waste had to leave Belarus. So me personally, I was very much concerned about it, but the work on this article ended up being an investigative work where I really had to read through all the documents, agreements, and with the help of different experts, I was able to understand why this waste didn't leave Belarus and why normally it doesn't happen, what are the contracts, what are the connections between Belarus and Russia, and how different types of waste should be sent where, etc. So I think this article was kind of interesting, so I suggest reading it. Then we started hearing such talks in Belarus that a nuclear waste repository would be a good thing to build. So I got hooked by this news and I decided to find out what kind of nuclear waste sites exist, and this repository, could they be good or could they be bad? And through working on this article, I was able to understand that there is no such a thing as a good nuclear waste repository. I worked with Mr. Zaporozhye, and he's an expert. We talked to him about different kinds of repositories. So we talk to why none of them is good enough and what is happening to them over time. So this is the headline, which you see of my article. It is titled, "Will it leak or it will not?" And it is about the nuclear waste repository. So there were a few there were a few situations which provoked my interest, and I thought that it would be good to turn to experts to write down an article. So what else is there? There was a Chernobyl week, during which normally we cover and talk a lot about nuclear energy and specifically about Chernobyl. And to me, it was kind of a surprise to find out that nuclear power plant, they emit unhealthy elements and unhealthy emissions and gases, even if there are no accidents. For example, it is treaty as an element or an element from the chemical table of Mendeleev, which is number 17, and other gases which are being emitted, but very rarely being mentioned in the news, and people normally don't know about this. So you talk to an expert, and sometimes this expert would bring up a subject that provokes more interest, and you see that, all right, maybe I could investigate even more there. So I realized that nuclear power plants, they emit different unhealthy gases and elements that are not so good for our health. And I decided to write down an article about it. In Belarus, they really like praising nuclear power plants. Sometimes they even say that even if an airplane would crash directly into the nuclear power plant that is built in Belarus, this nuclear power plant would survive, would stand, and nothing would happen. So this is kind of a governmental myth that they try to communicate, but no one is saying about the drawbacks of nuclear power plant, what is happening to them, how they behave, even when there are no any emergencies or accidents. So in Belarus, quite often we have different types of failures. For example, we hear some explosions or something happens in this nuclear power plant. Sometimes it has to be shut down. Sometimes it has to be turned on again. So something is always happening with our nuclear power plant in Belarus, and people get quite worried. So that's it from me, and I wanted to thank you and encourage you to send me your questions. Yes, thank you very much, Tanya. I think you really did well by mentioning that journalists have to work with experts. And I see the questions. Maybe we'll open the Q&A session after our next speaker. And I know that Svetlana is here. Svetlana, are you ready? Or do you want me to start your recording?
Svetlana just sent me a direct message that they are taking off. She's already on the plane, so I think it's better to show the video that you prepared for us. Then, Tanya, I'd like to ask you to please help me start the video. Okay. Svetlana has recorded a video because she is now flying from the hearings dedicated to the nuclear power plant construction. Maxim and Elias can respond to the questions after her video presentation. Good afternoon. Esteemed participants of the webinar, sadly, I won't be able to join you during the webinar because it coincides with my flight. I had to come to Almaty, where yesterday there were hearings dedicated to making a decision about the construction of nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan. This idea has been discussed in mass media outlets for quite some time, and mostly is described as something positive by the state officials and people who are interested in further promoting nuclear energy. And we also have some terms of reference, and they have been dreaming of constructing a nuclear power plant, but up till this date, we have managed to convince them that it is not necessary to done. And the public in Kazakhstan was very active, and this is already the fourth wave that the Ecoforum is going through. Also, if we take into account the plan to bring in the nuclear waste back in the past, that we also managed to fight back. And the hearings that took place yesterday, this was a terrible staging without any arguments provided, without any facts provided. And we have just organized a press conference. And I hope that my colleagues will share the link to the recording of that press conference. You can take a look at it to listen to all of the arguments. And to not take up a lot of your time, I'd like to say that presently in Kazakhstan, there is no need whatsoever to construct nuclear power plant, because it is known that this is not a competitive way to produce energy. We know that this is not a climate solution. And this also was mentioned by many international organizations worldwide. Nevertheless, mass media outlets controlled by the government in Kazakhstan are not mentioning that. They are omitting it. They are saying that this is the solution for the energy deficiency, that this is a necessary step. They say that it is safe, that it even is safe for the climate, and they are denying on of the fact that have to do with how nuclear power plants are impacting the environment. And yesterday we saw that in a small village where there at least are several hundreds of people who are still residing there, this village used to be constructed as the Center for Energy Development, and they plan to build a large power plant there. However, that project was not implemented. Yesterday we saw lots of empty houses, empty apartments. Well, of course, back in the day, people used to live there, but people leave that place because there are no job opportunities except for using a river to catch fish. There's a school. The school is still working, but people are surviving there. And of course, they would like to have some production facility there, not far from their village. And they were convinced that nuclear power plant will solve all of the economic and social challenges in their lives. But at the same time, they haven't informed them about all of the risks that pertain to this project, and also have not mentioned that there are alternative solutions. The experts today yet again emphasized that 50 kilometers away from this village in Mirny, it is planned to construct large wind power plant with the capacity of about 1 gigawatt, and this is the same capacity of the nuclear power plant, and it creates more jobs if we compare to the nuclear power plant. But all of that is omitted when they're talking to people. And you know, it looked like a show yesterday when people were prepared in advance, and they even use such technologies that we all are well aware of, you know, to ask some questions to the experts, to distract them. At least 3 people came to me and asked me the same direct question. It was clear that it was prepared in advance, that it was a planned sabotage, rather than trying to really seek answers to their questions. So this kind of political technologies, this kind of public opinion manipulation is something that we saw yesterday. So what is being spread in Kazakh media outlets today, that people made the decision and the government even decided where it will be constructed. They have decided about the location. And all of them were referring to Article 12 of the law on the use of nuclear energy in the Republic of Kazakhstan. But they probably have never read this article, those who are referring to this article, because they didn't stick to it. They didn't respect it, because according to Article 12, when the decision is made on whether it should be constructed or not, the government of Kazakhstan has to take into account opinion of the local representative government. It's called Maslihat. Here, have to also take into account the safety criteria, environmental requirements, take into account risks, social and economic consequences. None of that was discussed yesterday. They simply talked about people's desire to have nuclear power plant not far from where they live. But how acceptable is that? How efficient is that? Does it comply with the international standards or procedures? The Arcus Convention, because our country is also a signatory to this convention. Because we realized yesterday that there is zero compliance with the procedure, which is the first step when it comes to making a decision about the nuclear power plant construction. Well, this is what I wanted to share with you about the recent events. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that my colleagues will be able to respond to your questions, because sadly I won't be able to be present with you online. This was presentation by Svetlana. If you have any questions regarding the construction of a nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan, you can submit them in the chat box. Yes, for now we're sticking to our schedule, so let us proceed to the questions. You can see all of them in our chat box. The first question was addressed to Artem about the repository of waste in the vicinity of Chernobyl. Is it underground? Is there any information regarding the storage? Well, there is a lot of information, in fact, because this has been started a long time ago. They probably started planning it in early 2000s. They, in fact, planned to construct it in early 2000. It was planned to be launched in March 2022, but because of the Russia's invasion, it was postponed. And from what we know now, it is covered on the news. The proper launch is supposed to happen by the end of this year, and they start with working all of the nuclear power plants that are under Ukraine's control. It is not underground. It looks more like the storages that are already in Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So basically, it is for 100 years of storing. But from what you understand, the nuclear industry waste, both on the news as well as an Energoatom statements, is shown not as something dangerous, not as a hazard as was, but rather a unique resource that the science is yet to discover how to use, but in future they would definitely discover all of the benefits. Thank you, Artem. There's one more question. You said that Ukrainian government supports development of nuclear power. In your opinion, why do they do that, and how do they justify it? Well, this is a very complicated question. We also asked it on multiple occasions. There were theories about who does it. Maybe this is a part of agreements with the United States of America, but most likely, well, it looks like that there are no agreements between the states. The Westinghouse also is not an American company because it went bankrupt, and it is owned by the Canadian/Japanese conglomerate. Of course, it's justified as, as substituting coal industry, saying that, look, nuclear power is one of the most highly technological in Ukraine, and it needs to be developed. This is a very important sector for the economy. Well, you know, they simply put the equal mark between large central industry, large generation equals independency and safety of Ukraine in terms of energy. They simply said that these two things are equal. This is safe for sure. We need to be independent. We should not depend on anyone. So every single time we hear that we have to construct nuclear power plants, what follows is that we will also be exporting it to Europe, as if Europe does not have its own plans about the energy domain development. But this is conversations. This is more conversations. Well, presently, we have the state-owned company, but it should be denationalized, so it's going to turn to the commercial facility. They keep talking about some agreements with the Westinghouse, but actually, I think Poland will be probably first to build some nuclear power plant, because I think what's going to happen with us is something similar that happened with Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant. Maybe something's gonna happen there in Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant. The rest of it are just conversations. They're just plain politics when they're saying that we're gonna do this because that will make us independent, because that will make it safer for us. You know, as it was just mentioned by our colleague in a video, that there is a group of people who are not taking into account multiple things, and they're only discussing their interest in building something for the sake of something. As one of my colleagues once told me, it is being built just for the sake of building it. Thank you, Artem. It seems to me that we can now move to Belarus, which became independent. Okay, Tanya, could you please tell us a couple of words about where you are and about how dangerous environmental journalism is in Belarus? What's your take on that? And then another question was, how do you think all of the challenges that keep popping up when constructing Belarus nuclear power plant impacted the opinion of the public? Thank you for the questions. Well, obviously, I am not in Belarus. I now live in Belgium. I moved 2 years ago. Yes, you know, to avoid any problems, because doing independent journalism in Belarus, well, let's be honest, is impossible. I criticized our nuclear policy back when I used to live in Belarus, but I did it before 2020. And it seems to me that then they turned a blind eye to that, even participated in public discussions on the first unit, and I wrote big angry article about what a weird performance it was. There was like a circus show, and I think it's very similar to what Svetlana has just mentioned in terms of what happening during the Kazakhstan hearings, because it looked like a performance, a stage performance. I wrote everything that I thought about it, but nothing happened. But that was before 2020. So back then, it was allowed to do that in Belarus. Clearly, after 2020, it became very dangerous to do this kind of thing. And I lived in Belarus until 2021. And of course, that year was pretty serene in terms of this topic, so I didn't write that much. Then I left, and now I can do whatever I want. I can write whatever I want regarding this subject matter. Now, the second question about the public opinion. Unfortunately, and I think that all of the media are faced with that. Our readers are people who are loyal to us, who by default already have the same values as us. So yes, some portals dedicated to LGBTQ plus are mostly followed by the LGBTQ plus people. If we're talking about feminism, mostly feminists are following those media. The same with environment. That is why our followers and our readers are mostly those people who already are against it, and we don't have to convince them or change their mind. But now talking about how do we engage the audience that is not interested, that is neutral, or doesn't understand the subject matter. We do not yet quite understand that, except for trying to disseminate the information as much as possible. And unfortunately, my impression is the public does not care, which surprises me, given that we had to go through a Chernobyl disaster and people in Belarus could feel that directly, and it was a tragedy for everyone. But during the public hearings, for example, there was a lady who obviously was asked to speak up, and she said that she moved from Chernobyl when this disaster happened. She moved to a different town, and she said, well, that happens. We all are human beings. Well, that can happen. You can't do anything. Yes, it was a disaster. It was scary. But still, this is not a reason to stop. We have to develop because it's so amazing, good, environmentally friendly. And I think that propaganda in this case works good because recently the website of the Ministry of Energy in Belarus has published this survey. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but our favorite 80+% support and won't build the second nuclear power plant. About 10% are neutral, and to make it look good, 2 or 3% were against. But they're against just simply because they don't understand this matter. And everywhere in official state media, everybody says how good it is and how supportive people are of it. And of course, when something happens, when there are some drawbacks, it is being presented as something that was planned, that, well, if we have to shut it down, this is because we're testing different capacities. And I would like to address one more question to my own self, because I think that you might also think about it. Many people ask this. Do we take commentary from the representatives of the government, which people do in other countries? And of course, I would like to talk to people who are representing the official state position or government representatives, but sadly, given the present context in Belarus, it's impossible. They are not willing to give us the commentary. They are not willing to give it. The best case scenario is the official reply saying that, you have to first submit this, then obtain a letter that says that you can ask a question, and then with this letter, you can ask that question, but clearly nobody's going to respond to me. Yet it would be amazing and great if we could talk to the other party, to the people on the other side of the barricades, to also print their opinion. But unfortunately, this is technically impossible. They don't want to get in touch with us. So even though we would like to hear some official opinion presented, talk to the government representatives, it is impossible.
Спасибо, Таня. Мне кажется, что
Thank you very much, Tanya. I think that the situation with Belarus is just horrible, specifically taking into account the war. Well, we wouldn't like to have this similar situation for our colleagues from the Central Asia. Aliyah, I see that you want to comment, and maybe you could share with us here your slides about the suppliers of the technology and how they work in Kazakhstan. We can see your presentation, your slides. Yes, thank you. I just wanted to show where we are in terms of construction of the first nuclear power plant, which site was selected. Initially, there were three sites. One was in the west, another was in Kurchatov, next to the former and now we are close to, now we decided to pick Ulken. It is not so far away from Bishkek and not so far away from Almaty, right at the bank of Balkharsh Lake. Just as Svetlana already mentioned, there was prepared already pre-constructed the platform for the nuclear power plant. It was planned there in back in 80s, and the whole And the whole town around, or the village, was constructed with this nuclear power plant construction in mind. And people for many decades are already awaiting for this power plant, and they have been promised a lot of benefits, a new hospital, new roads, job opportunities, a new school. All of this has been promised there to people who live in Ulken village. And not everyone, but the majority, they support the idea of construction the nuclear power plant. At which stage are we at the moment? The organizers held something that they called a public discussion, public hearing yesterday in Ulken village, because they wanted to receive support from the population for construction of the power plant. And by this plan on your screens, you can see there is a lot of steps ahead, specifically when there will be the public hearing stage, because for the moment there is the terms of conditions, there are no documents and there are no technology suppliers selected yet, so there is nothing to discuss publicly at the moment. There are 4 different suppliers that are being at the moment proposed from Russia, from China, and from other countries. However, if there'll be such a situation when there would be a lot of concerns in Kazakhstan, the South Korean or the French supplier would not be considered. So the choice would be between the Russian supplier and Chinese supplier. So this is the public hearing which took place yesterday, and please see and try to understand the level of this hearing. So on the right side of the screen, you can see a leaflet that was distributed. And you see they used bananas in order to explain. So they show that 1 banana amounts or equals to a radioactive dosage that a person receives who lives in the area of 50 kilometers around the power plant. So there is no any problem. And 2 bananas and 3 bananas a person gets in kind of certain other situations. So just as Svetlana already mentioned, these discussions have been held somehow under the banner of the article number 12, where it is mentioned that the final decision can be taken only with full consent from the local authorities, but there has to be 5 clauses fulfilled, which is on the slide, and they were not fulfilled whatsoever. But we see that there is a huge need in the informational and educational campaign, because radiation is not banana, and there are risks that have to be considered. And the second thing which is important is to make people understand that these decisions are being made with violation of the rules. So this is exactly the time where the civil society has to step in, has to get involved. And just as Svetlana has mentioned, later on it would be more difficult, because once the decision is taken, this power plant would become a classified object, and there would be no information revealed. So the aim of our campaign is to communicate to people, to form groups of people that are ready to put their energy to push forward the dialogue. And there are also other non-governmental organizations that talk to the population, explain what are the risks for the environment and for the health. So we work with support of international organizations as well. So if there is anyone who's interested in contacting us, here are our contacts, and I can send and share the slides with Irina. Maybe someone is interested in having it, or just contact us directly. We'll share the slides with you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Aliya, for your comment and for explaining. Yes, I think that the information is really important, and I hope that you'd be able to change the situation and make people understand what it is, and it is a problem for Kyrgyzstan, for Kazakhstan, so it's important to talk about it. So I think we are ready to finalize our meeting. The only thing I just want to mention that EECCA can prepared their position on the nuclear energy, and they submitted their position, their statement to the national authorities in the countries of the Central Asia. They received a reply from the national authorities, and I'll share a link where you would be able to see it. And I'll share other links as well. Tanya, yes, I just remembered one kind of peculiar situation regarding nuclear energy. So now we see that in Belarus there is a lot of dialogues being held about constructing nuclear power plant and why it is so great. And now they kind of they offer this benefit of the nuclear power plant as something that would help us to have energy independence from Russia. But I think that everyone who is a little bit more knowledgeable would immediately understand that this is completely foolish to think so, because all the components are being imported from Russia in order to build this second nuclear power plant. So they are kind of advertising this great idea of the second power plant as energy independence, but it is completely ridiculous. Yes, thank you very much for such a very important comment. And the Green Portal is one of those very few but very important windows that helps people to understand the possible consequences of construction of the new power plant. Olga Boyko. Hello, everyone. My name is Olga Boyko, and I'm coordinator of CAN EECCA, and I sent the statement from CAN EECCA to you, but I would like to share with you our experience. So we sent, we forwarded a few letters to the Ministry of Energy in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. In Uzbekistan, we didn't receive any reply, and we didn't have high hopes. Kazakhstan sent their reply 2 times, the Ministry for Environment and Ministry for Energy, and their replies were quite justified, were quite full, and the justification that we see in those letters and those replies and in other platforms was that a year ago the nuclear energy and gas were approved as green energy sources, and now everyone is using it as the main justification, and Kazakhstan did the same. But in Kyrgyzstan, the situation was the following. The first time we received a letter with a short statement saying that you can find all information on our website, but there was no information on our website. And the members of CAN EECCA later sent a reply to us, or members of the ministry that cooperate with CAN EECCA, they sent to us their reply saying that please don't worry, this type of energy is considered as green energy, and don't worry, we will have public hearings, so we'll do that. I just wanted to share this experience. And in Kazakhstan, there are 2 initiatives that are quite large scale. One is about construction of the nuclear power plant, and there is another area that is quite close to the border of Uzbekistan, and the nuclear power plant of Uzbekistan would be located very close to the border with Kazakhstan. Normally, these power plants are being constructed a little bit far away from larger cities, so Kazakhstan will not feel safe. And no one is contacting Kazakhstan population or Kazakhstan authorities. So these are the news, and you can find this news on our website. I will not send many links to you, but that's just for you to know. And I'd like to thank you for everything that you are doing. Thank you, Oля, very much. So I think we are ready to finalize our meeting. And thank you very much, Artem, Aliya, Tanya, Maxim, and Svetlana for being with us. So that's it. And this is the time to say goodbye, and we'll meet you in our other webinars. So have a good day. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.